You probably want to rank up in the Army, maybe to make more money, maybe to have more responsibility, whatever your reason for wanting to rank up might be. You might be curious how long that's going to take you to be able to achieve the rank that you want to get to. How long is it going to take to get to the next rank, to get to the one after that, and so on and so forth. Well, that's what I'm going to be covering in today's video. That video starts right now. So you can actually come into the Army at a higher rank. You don't have to start off all the way at the bottom at E1. There's different ways you can actually join the Army as an E2, E3, E4 if you want to. There's even ways that you can fast track to E5. And if you want to learn about that, I got a video that I'll link down in the description box down below if you want to learn about that. But the purpose of this video is how long is it going to take me to go through those ranks, right? If I didn't get to come in at an early rank or whatever the case was, how long will it take me to get up to a certain rank? And I'm not going to go through every single rank because at a certain point, if you're at that position, you probably already know how it works. You don't need me to explain it to you. But for some of the lower rankings, you might want to know how long it's going to take you to get up to those ranks. So we're going to assume that you're starting off at the very bottom, E1. You didn't have anything that qualified you to be able to come into the Army at a higher rank. You have to start off as an E1. How long is it going to take me to get to E2? So in order to qualify for E2, that's still private, right? Even E1's a private, E2 is also private, but now E2 at least has something on your chest, on your sleeves for your dress uniforms, but that is going to take you at least 6 months, all right? So that is an automatic thing. If you've been in the Army for 6 months, you'll automatically be able to get promoted to an E2. There's ways to get promoted early, and I'll talk about that in the next example, but nonetheless, at a minimum, 6 months in the Army, that's 6 months time in service, you will automatically be promoted to an E2. But then moving up to the next rank there, that's an E3, that's a private first class. Now you at least have a little bit of a different title, making a little bit more money. That one is going to require at a minimum of 4 months time in rank at 12 months time in service. So basically what that means, right, you have the time and rank. You have to have been in E2 for that amount of time, in this case, 4 months. So if you've been a private E2 for 4 months, then you meet part of the requirements. The other part of the requirement is 12 months time in service. That means you've been in the Army for 1 year. Now, when you've met both of those, 4 months as an E2, and you've been in the Army for at least a year, automatically you'll be promoted to an E3, a private first class. You can get promoted sooner than that though. You can get what's called a waiver. You can get a waiver that allows you to get promoted faster. Now, here's how waivers sort of work in the Army. Just, I guess, the short example of how waivers work without getting too complicated. Typically at the unit level, they're gonna have X amount of waivers that they're allowed to give out. Maybe in this month, they're allowed to give out, 2 waivers, 3 waivers, whatever, to the next rank to private first class, or waivers for E4, or whatever the case is, right? Units usually have a certain allocation of amount of waivers they're allowed to give. So if you've done great things, you've gone above and beyond, then your leadership may put you in for one of those waivers that may get approved for that or denied. It just kind of depends on the leadership. Now, you can only usually get a waiver for usually one of the two things. You usually can't get a waiver for both time in service and time in rank. But let's say in this case, you've been in E2 for 6 months, right? You've been in E2 for 6 months, but you're not yet at that 1 year mark. Well, you could possibly get in a waiver for that time in service kind of, requirement and be able to waive that and be able to get you promoted sooner than that 12 months. So they usually can only give waiver for one or the other, usually not for both. There are some circumstances where they can do it for both, but for simplicity, I'm not going to overcomplicate this. Typically, in most cases, they can usually only waive one or the other. So you're gonna have to meet at least one of those. And if you're trying to get promoted early, then you just gotta try to stand out. So hopefully you can get a waiver for the other thing that you don't meet the requirements of. But nonetheless, you just do good, do your thing, whatever. Maybe you don't get a waiver. 4 months as an E2, 12 months in the Army, you're automatically gonna get promoted to an E3. Moving up from there, you go to an E4, which is a specialist. We're not going to talk about a corporal. I should mention briefly a corporal, but you don't automatically go to corporal. There's some requirements for that. But for E4, that requires at least 6 months of time in rank. So 6 months as a private first class and 24 months time in service. So 24 months in the Army. Again, there are those waivers that could shorten that time frame, but at a minimum, if you have been as a PFC for 6 months and you've been in the Army for 24 months, automatic promotion to E4. But also in an E4 realm is a corporal, right? But that works a little bit differently. A corporal in the United States Army is someone that has gone to the promotion board for the E5. So you've gone to the E5 promotion board and you've gone off to NCO Academy and passed that NCO Academy, but you don't yet have enough points to make E5. So in that case, because you've done the board and the non-commissioned officer academy and passed it, you're automatically promoted to corporal until you can meet those points to be able to make E5 to become a sergeant. Now, I did recently have a video that kind of talked about, them kind of like changing some of the requirements on like the non-commissioned officer academies and everything like that. And you may have heard like, oh, you don't need to have, BLC, that basic leaders course, to move up to E5, which is true. But in this case, if you're going to become a corporal, then that is going to be the case, right? If you get to go to BLC, you pass it, then you're going to become a corporal until you make points. Now, if you're in a situation where you've already made points, then you can kind of skip corporal and just go from E4 to E5 and be able to become a sergeant without having to become a corporal, because you already made the points, and then maybe later go to BLC or whatever the case might be. But we'll talk about the requirements to get to the next rank though for E5. So still, to become an E5, you're still gonna need to go to the promotion board. So that means your leadership is gonna have to send you to that promotion board when you're in that eligible kind of window to be able to send you to the promotion board. Typically, they can usually send you to the promotion board around the time of you being in the Army for about, I think it's 2 or 3 years, somewhere's around there. Then you'll be eligible to be sent to the promotion board. But then there's these things called primary and secondary zones, because in order for you to actually get promoted to E5, that is not automatic. All the way up to E4 was automatic. E5 is not automatic. So now, in order for you to get promoted to E5, well, you're gonna have to pass that promotion board. Now with the new requirements, you don't necessarily have to pass that basic leaders course just yet, but you will need to have that before you can move to the next rank. But to still get promoted, you're gonna have to make points. Points will fluctuate each month based on what the Army needs, right? If you're in an MOS that they need E5s for that MOS, then your points will be really low, so it's easier to obtain. But if they don't need, maybe they're over strength on E5s in that MOS or whatever, then the points might be really hard to make it harder for people to be able to get promoted. And then they'll fluctuate based on needs. People get out of the Army, people get promoted, whatever happens, and then points go up and down, whatever the case is. But let's talk about those primary and secondary zones. So usually primary zones, points are lower, secondary zones, points are higher. So primary zone for making E5 would be 10 months time in grade and 34 months time in service, whereas that secondary zone would be 4 months time in grade and 16 months time in service. So nonetheless, you're gonna have to be in one of those zones to be eligible to be able to get promoted. Just gonna depend on which zone you're in to see which points to look at. From there, from E5 to E6, that's the next rank you go up to. I'm not gonna talk about the requirements for that one, because probably if you're in that situation, you know how long you have to be in the Army for. But just know, if you wanna go from an E5 to an E6, you have another promotion board you have to go through. You also have points to worry about. But then after E6, from E7 on up, no more promotion boards. They don't have points anymore, but they just do things differently. It's called like being DA selected, where they kind of look at your history, what you've accomplished in the Army, what roles you've, kind of held to deem if you're, eligible or worthy, I guess you could say, to be able to move up to that next rank. So points only matter up to E6. Promotion boards only happen for E5 and E6. After that, no more promotion boards. After E6, there's no more points, just DA selected. So hopefully that gives you a little bit better idea as to how long it might take you to roughly rank up. I know a lot of times people have asked me, how long would it take me to make E5 in the Army? And typically that's usually around 3 or 4 years. It sometimes depends on the MOS you're in, because if you're in certain MOSs, the points might be really high. It might be really hard to be able to rank up to that. But an MOS that points are usually always low is like 11 Bravo. 11 Bravo, usually those individuals have an easier time to be able to rank up to, especially E5, possibly even at times E6 as well. But the points are usually pretty low for those MOSs, so it's a little bit easier for them to fast track up to E5. But other MOSs, especially like ones that are maybe a little bit smaller MOSs, they don't have a lot of people, so you have to wait for people to rank up or get out of the Army or whatever the case might be. Those MOSs typically have higher point standards, and so you might see some people where it takes them longer to get to E5, longer to get to E6, because the points are much higher. It's very common. You could see people that made it to E5 in the infantry in 4 years, 5 years, 3 years, all that kind of thing. Whereas like someone like me, who is an 88 Mike, took me a little bit longer. It took me 5 years to get to E5, and then E6, while I was in, was not really achievable because the points were maxed out at 798, and the only way you can usually get 798 points is if you have basically like a bachelor's degree, you've maxed your physical fitness test, you're getting expert on the qualification range, you've done a bunch of military education, all sorts of stuff to be able to get that many points. It's really hard to get 798. Typically, when they max it out to 798 for the points, that's almost impossible. So that makes it to where it's nearly impossible for people to get promoted until they need people to get promoted. And then once they lower those points, then it becomes a little bit more achievable. And the time when I was in the Army, when I was eligible to go from E5 to E6, the points were always 798. I wasn't able to get that. So that's why I ended up getting out at E5 in the Army. Even got maybe a video on that, then maybe a card pops up if you really want to learn the full story. But nonetheless, that is how it works for ranking up from E1 all the way up to E5. How long will it take you? The eligibility requirements to get there in the comment section down below. If you currently serve in the United States Army, you did serve in the United States Army, how long did it take you to get to maybe your rank you're currently at? Or how long did it take you to get to E5? Whatever the case was, right? Maybe one that you want to kind of share about. And then for those of you that maybe are not yet in the Army, what's your goal? Is your goal to get to maybe E4 and be in that E4 Mafia and then get the hell out of the Army? Or maybe you want to stay in and make it to Sergeant Major of the Army? I don't know. Leave me some comments down in the comment section down below. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit that thumbs up. I'm Christopher Chaos. I'll see you next time. See ya.